Well, welcome to Mosaic Church this morning. My name's Chris Zauner. I'm the lead pastor here. Welcome. We're excited that you've taken time out of your Sunday morning to join us. Hopefully hear some good news, meet some good people. If you were here with us last week, you know that we started a new, fresh series. We're in a series called Love Under Construction. Love Under Construction. What does that mean, Chris? Well, let me tell you. So, our society, our culture, a lot of things about the world we live in have kind of deconstructed what love is intended to be as far as what the Bible tells us and what God has designed love to be in our lives. And so as a church, we wanted to start out from our launch Sunday last week for our first series, reconstructing or constructing or bringing back to its origin what love is. Last week we talked about a couple key things, that love is not a feeling or an action, but it's a motive. It's engaging with people in a way that is not out of selfishness, but out of selflessness. And that in order to do that well, we need to be constantly receiving and giving love from God and others. We use this imagery of like being a lake that only has water flowing in and then it gets stagnant, but that we need to be this body of people that water also flows out of, that our love also flows out of. We can't just hoard it, but we can't just be giving out love without receiving it from the one who created and designed it. So that's what we're talking about. Like I said, last week we just laid some groundwork. And over the next weeks, we're going to be talking about a whole spectrum of things. We're going to be talking about marriage. We're going to be talking about divorce and breakup, singlehood. Spoiler alert on that. Singlehood is not the plague, okay? But we're going to go there. We're going to talk about that, how to make the most out of whatever season you find yourself in. We're going to talk more specifically about sex from a biblical perspective and how it was designed to be glorious, just used in the proper way. We're going to go into all these things that have to do with love, sex, and relationship. And this week, we get to talk about something that some of you, if I don't unpack this a little, you might say like, oh, cool, time for a nap. We're going to talk about dating, okay? And if you're anything like me, married, glad that season's by, please hang with me and don't check out, because here's why. At Mosaic Church, we are a family of people that are in all different stages of life. And hopefully you're interacting with people outside of church that are dating, going through all different relationships, part of the relationship spectrum. And it is necessary for us as a family to have a good, solid perspective on all of these so that we can love other people well. I pray that either through life groups or on a Sunday morning or even in your own family unit, you are interacting with people that are not like you, that are not in the same stage of life as you, and that you can speak truth into their situation. And so if you're married and you're like, dating's gone, I am very glad that I'm no longer in that season, great, I hear you. But we still need, as a family, to engage in this topic in a meaningful way and hear how God would have us enter into this so that we can help others. So can we agree to that this morning, that we're not going to make this just about ourselves, but this is about a family and helping other people also to pursue and follow Jesus. And so this is meaningful for all of us. Sound good? Perfect. All right. So here's how I've come to think of dating, and maybe this will resonate with some of you. Dating can be kind of like selling a used car, can't it? A couple people get it. Think about it. We work really hard to hide anything that would be a deal breaker, that wouldn't help the sale go through, right? And on the other side, we work really hard to advertise only what will help close the deal. It's like selling a used car. We present what we want people to see, and then we keep the rest back in the closet, behind the curtain, whatever you want to call it. But we only present what we think is marketable or that people will like. Can you guys resonate with that a little bit? So I don't know if you're into Twitter. It might be bad to say that without any context. Oh, pastor said dating's like a used car. That might not be taken right. But I really believe that the tension we find ourselves in the dating world can be like that. It's about what we present and what we hide. And it takes time and it takes vulnerability and all these things to actually dig beneath the layers and see what's really going on in the condition of somebody's heart. Does that make sense? I don't think that any of us would say that in our initial interaction with anybody, especially if there was any sort of romantic interest, that we just knew who they were at their core. We knew the direction of their heart the first time we met them. And if you do think that, like, we should talk, because we just need to sift through some things there. But that is not going to be the case when you interact, especially with some of the opposite sex, looking to maybe romantically engage. Now, when I was going through the dating scene until I was 28, I was keenly aware of these games that would be played. And that's why I took the super sophisticated route, and I integrated dating and technology and found the second best thing that's ever happened to me through eHarmony. I know you guys are like, oh, now I'm really checking out. This guy's talking about online dating. But I say that not because I'm going to tell you all to go sign up, but the spectrum of dating and what dating looks like has changed immensely. There's many different avenues to meet people. There's ways to kind of cut through all the crud of the dating scene and get down to what's really going on. And I also tell you that because I spent months not wanting to tell people how I met my future wife. So maybe some of you can relate to that. But dating, in order to understand the spectrum of dating, we kind of got to know where it's come from. Because if we're going to be real, if you go do a Google search, what does the Bible say about dating? There's not going to be the word dating used in the Bible. Have you guys ever looked into this? Maybe some of you have just been looking where's the promises? God's going to give me somebody. I want to see it. I want it in the Bible. The Bible doesn't talk about dating because, quite honestly, dating is way messier than it was back then. And now you may think well, I know how they used to arrange marriages, and I would much rather have choice. But here's what happened. Back in ancient history, marriages were not something that were a freedom of expression or that somebody had choice in, but they were something that was arranged by the families. So you live in this small town, you're very, we'll say, insulated from the rest of the world because you can only ride a donkey so far and your sandals will wear out after so long walking in the rocks and the dirt, and you're kind of secluded to certain areas. So people would arrange marriages within their own communities often. And so they knew the history of a family. They knew what was happening. They knew the person, and families would say, hey, this is what's going to work out. This is going to be either a socioeconomic interaction, or this is going to be something that we want to bring our families together, maybe for some sort of political or social reasons. But these things were not oh, do you love me? Yes, get down on a knee, and you have the diamond come in and pan out the camera and this huge romantic thing. It was literally hey, let's have our kids marry each other. Cool, how many cows and how many goats okay, how many acres you got? Perfect, let's do this. And they would arrange this marriage. They would arrange this relationship. And so choice and this concept of love that we have today was not how they did things back then. Now, I don't know if you guys are like me, but I think about that. I'm man, that seems a little backwards. That seems kind of impersonal. And we'll talk about that. But we got to remember people did this for thousands of years. And people still do this today. Now, today it's viewed a little differently. We would view societies that still practice that. Here in the West, we would probably view them as archaic and oppressive. But many countries, that's all they've ever known. It's worked. They understand that there's more to love than the fairy tale that happens on the Disney movies, and that there's something more about it. And so it's just something that's worked out for them. And so I would urge you not to judge things just based on our paradigm, but over the spectrum of time, this is what has worked for some societies. And I don't think we can enter in and say, absolutes about their culture, their nature, that kind of stuff, because it's something that we don't experience anymore. But that is what dating used to be. Over time, into the 19th century, we see a shift start to happen. We see where communities start to do more things socially. We start to see, especially here in the States, we see mobilization out to the West. There's this expansion of the frontier, new areas. And what happens is this concept of courtship enters in. Now, courtship would be not necessarily hey, I like you, let's exchange goats and acreage and make something happen, but it would be if somebody had an interest, they would go and they would approach the family. And the family was integrally woven into this process of courtship. The hangouts or the dates would look more like something sitting on a rocker on the front porch while the parents kept an eye, which as a dad of 3 girls, I am down with this whole idea of courtship, okay? I'm saying, I'll sit out there, you sit in the rocker, you sit on the other side, and I will sit in the middle with a shotgun. I'm down with courtship. But this was the 19th century, okay? And so it was, like I said, Relationship with family and respected people in your community was integral into these relationships being formed. People got to speak into them like, hey, I would look at this. I don't think this works out. And people actually respected their elders and their parents and the people around them to listen to the input they had. So that's what courtship looked like. And then we see another shift happening in the early 20th century. And that's the first time that we see the word dating used in any publication here in the United States. And what happened is we have urbanization happening, industrialization, we have vehicles, we have this, music scene, all this entertainment stuff that's starting to blow up because we think of the roaring 20s in the United States, right? Like if you've had history class, you've heard that term before. But the entertainment industry and people just desiring to straight up have fun really started happening in the early 20th century. And that is, coincidentally, when this concept of dating came into effect. Now, it left the front porch and went to someplace out in public. It left parents and other people being integrally involved to way more of an individualized choice, way more about maximizing fun and entertainment, and it went way more to being able to kind of isolate yourselves from people that could maybe speak into your relationship. Now, that's on a broad sense. That's not saying every relationship isolates himself. Please don't overgeneralize with that one. But what I am saying is we see this tendency to make dating more and more about the couple, the individual choice, the entertainment, and the fun aspect, rather than the combination and integration of families and all that. And so we see that happening. And then now in the beginning of the 21st century, we see another shift happening. Anybody know what that is? The hookup, right? The hookup. For those of you who haven't heard that term before, the hookup, that dating has been somewhat stripped of relationship, vulnerability, commitment, and it's been just about physical satisfaction and getting the most you can out of somebody while giving the least. It's been about maximizing what you can take from another person, a relationship, or a situation, and putting in the least that you have to, the least amount of commitment, relational investment, vulnerability, but to receive the most satisfaction. And currently, that is the spectrum of dating, the dominant spectrum of dating that we see in our society. I would say, unfortunately, that is what we see now. So dating over the course of time has went from something about just socioeconomic status and the integration of two families for the leverage of maybe in their geographic location to make sure they're successful, they can be provided for. And it's moved along this spectrum towards entertainment and fun. And I would argue that it is at the other end of that spectrum now. Because let's be real, if you want to have the most possible in-the-moment fun, instant gratification with someone of the opposite sex, what do? You just go all the way, right? You just go there. In the moment, it's fun. You just take it there. You strip away any commitment or all those the vulnerability of relationship. You strip it away and you just go there. And you take what you want, and then a lot of times you move along. What's the most fun? What gives me the most immediate satisfaction? When dating is minimized to entertainment and fun, it becomes relationally hollow. And I think I would make the argument that in this generation that's coming up right now, thanks to social media, internet, all these different things, like we have a very relationally hollow generation coming up, right? And I think it actually bleeds into other generations. I think it's not just isolated to the next generation, but face-to-face interaction is becoming less and less of the norm. Could you guys agree with that? Face-to-face interaction. Now, there's some huge blessings to this. I have family in Iowa. That is expensive and a lot of miles behind the wheel to get there and see them. And I am grateful for things like the internet and Skype and all these things where you can send pictures, you can video chat, all that. I think it is great. But when we pull ourselves out of actual relational interaction and we make things about entering into some video game world for our social interaction or merely just posting blurbs on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and all these other places to satisfy us relationally and to make us feel loved, we hollow out the core of what relationship is. And I would argue that that is where the dating scene is left at this point in time. what we do is we try to use selfishness for satisfaction. Selfishness for satisfaction, which just leaves us in this spiral of lacking actual meaning in our relationships. Now, I realize that in a room with this many people, there's going to be some of us who have fallen all across this spectrum of the dating scene and what our physical relationships have looked like and all this stuff I'm talking about. And please hear me on this. I'm not bringing this message to bring shame, guilt, and condemnation into this room. I'm bringing this message to bring some perspective, because oftentimes we find ourselves somewhat at the mercy of our culture and our society. And it helps to have a healthy perspective so that we can combat that and what it means for us, so that we can combat this. And I realize that a lot of us, in the vein of relationships and moving something even towards marriage, which we'll talk about in the coming weeks, some of us are just hopeless about this topic because we've never seen it happen well in the past. Maybe we've been hurt by somebody else and we've just written off this whole concept of being vulnerable and committing to a relationship because we've seen how that goes, and I don't want to open up those scars or open myself up to be hurt again. And some of us, if you're anything like I was when I was single, you just don't know what the heck you're doing. And so you've put up some walls to protect yourself from hurt because you just straight up clueless, right? Like, what does this look like? I'm not a super relational person. I'm just going to go ahead and isolate myself because I know that people get hurt doing this. And so I'm just going to put up these false walls and protect myself from that. And when we do this, we ignore, like I talked about last week, the core purpose of why we exist, why we were brought into existence. And that's to have meaningful and healthy relationships with one another. Meaningful, healthy, intimate relationships with one another. And I'm not just talking into the marriage world. I'm talking about with, friends and family and coworkers, like meaningful. That word, like meaningful, is not just something I throw out lightly, but something that you find purpose, commonality, where you're headed in a similar direction and you can make one another better people. And in the church context, we believe that means helping one another to follow Jesus. That is a meaningful relationship. And I believe that when we let technology and all our preconceived notions, our hopelessness, our hurt, and all these things infiltrate our relational lives and our dating life, we ignore the reason that we were created for these healthy relationships. And then when you enter the dating world, what this leads us to do is we find ways around being vulnerable. We find ways around learning how to commit, how to be committed to somebody else. And we have trouble experiencing and offering unconditional love, even amidst the mess and the flaws. And yes, you're going to have flaws and a mess with these relationships. Like, let's not go to fairy tale land here. Like, they're messy. There's flaws. But unconditional love is something that can only be experienced both in giving and receiving, if you're willing to commit and deal with that stuff and work through it. Not run from it because, I don't want to go there. My selfishness alert's going off. I'm going to go move on to the next one. But to actually work through those things is where we get to experience true depth of comfort and commitment and vulnerability in a relationship. Does that make sense? So, like I said earlier, we're going to talk more about marriage, divorce, breakups, what the Bible says about sex, all that stuff in the coming weeks. But we do want to talk about some specifics, maybe, some of the mechanics of this dating thing. And I believe there's two specific things that are worth talking about here this morning. Now, before I start, if you guys entered in here this morning and you're unaware of where you're at, you probably didn't make it through the music without figuring out, you're at church, okay? This is a Christ-centered church where we believe in following Jesus and trying to be more and more like him. So that being said, when I'm talking about dating, guess what? It's going to be integrated with that. And I know people come into a church at all different points of a relationship or seeking who Jesus is, what he means in their life, and all of that. And I just want to be honest right off the bat, not apologetically so, but just honest. This is going to be about how to date and follow Jesus at the same time. Because we're at church, I'm a pastor, you probably expect that from me. But I don't want to say these things just to throw the rest of the world out with the bathwater. Like, it's not to bring shame or condemnation to anybody that's still trying to figure out what it means to follow Jesus. It's just, that's what we're talking about here this morning. So I want to preface it with that. Excuse me. All right. So the first thing that we need to talk about is Jesus is meant to be the center and the priority of our lives relationally. He's not meant to be some side thought, some like just servant that when we need something, we throw up a prayer, or when we remember it when something good happens, we're like, we do the thing you see on TV with all the athletes, like, oh yeah, thanks, you helped me score a touchdown, Jesus, you must have been there on that one. Like, that's not Jesus. He's meant to be the center, the reason for our motivation, for why we do things, and to give us a foundation for how we relate with people. He's not an afterthought. He is actually supposed to be the first thought when we engage with other people. So I say that because when we enter into a relationship, when both people do not have Jesus as a common foundation and anchor point in their relationship, then they do not have a common foundation and anchor point in their relationship. Does that make sense? If you don't have Jesus at the center of your relationship, then there is no common center to your relationship. That's a bold statement, Pastor. It is. It is. But bear with me here, because this isn't about pitting a Christian versus non-Christian, or someone that's following Jesus against someone that's not. This is just talking about where we find meaning, commonality, and something that brings purpose and flourishment into a relationship. Now, a couple things have to happen if we're going to have a Christian and a non-Christian engaged in a dating relationship that's headed towards marriage. Either the Christian does not have Christ as the top priority, central in their life, or maybe they do, but you've just come to terms with, hey, it's okay. We have a common understanding. Like, he's cool with it. I'm cool with it. We find purpose and meaning in other things. We find purpose and meaning in other things. And I'll tell you, in the early stages of the relationship, you can tell yourself that. You can probably walk that out. But as time goes on, one of two things are going to have to happen for the marriage to find meaning and purpose. Either the person that says they're a Christian is going to have to step out of that belief and that lifestyle to the fullness of what it's intended to be, or the other person is going to have to accept to follow Jesus in their own life. Because with Jesus at the center, we believe that if you're saying you're a Christian, if you're identifying that way, like I'm a Jesus follower, that he is the motivation and the core of how we live our lives. And so we believe then in a relationship that is also the core. And just to ignore that for the sake of the person that you're with, it can't go on that way. Something has to give. And what happens is when two people that have different core beliefs, different life motivations come together in a situation like that, there's these unspoken expectations that they're putting on one another, right? Because one of them's hoping someday they're going to believe in Jesus. They'll become a Christian someday. I just got to find a way to navigate this for the short term and it'll all work out. And the other person's like, you know what? Obviously they're already engaged with me. It's not that big of a deal to them. So I'll just bear this out and they'll get on the same page as me and realize they're foolish later. I've heard many people having these conversations in a dating relationship. It is not loving to place these expectations on somebody. So I'm not saying this just oh, how dare you date with somebody that doesn't have the same faith or anything of you. It may seem short-minded, but really it's unloving to enter into a relationship hoping to go for the long run with these unspoken expectations. Any of you ever been in a marriage or a committed relationship before? You know that unspoken expectations they're just bad, right? Ambiguity and unspoken expectations can just tear things down. They can bring bitterness, roots of bitterness, and all kinds of things in a marriage and in a relationship. And so starting a relationship on that foundation just isn't a good idea. It's just not setting yourself up for success. So I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about what I am talking about, but I'm talking about. What I am talking about is we want to find a much deeper level to connect than just who our favorite sports team is, what show we like to watch, what I like or what I'm attracted to about you, or what game we like to play. Because all those things change over time. I know many couples who've been married 30, 40, 50 years, and the things that they find connection with as far as their hobbies, what they find adventurous, their games, the things that they like to do to have fun together, they change often. Think about it. If you're into skydiving and you're 22 years old and that's a big part of what you guys do for fun together, do you think at 60 years old that's still going to be a big part of your relationship? I mean, that'd be awesome if it was, right? But let's be real. Over time, things change. Physically, your body can't handle what it once did. Kids start happening, bodies change, stress. Life just has a way of reshaping our interests and our hobbies and the things we like to do for fun. And so if we base a relationship on those, and that changes, well, what if I'm still a Red Sox fan and now you've been converted and you're a Yankees fan and this just isn't going to work? Those are two baseball teams for those of you that aren't into sports that hate each other. So if we base it just on those kind of surface commonalities, we're dooming the relationship. We're dooming the relationship. And we're expecting things of the other person that just isn't fair to place on them. Does that make sense? It's not about saying one person is bad or one person it's just about having commonality and meaningful connection in a relationship. And I believe that having Jesus at the center of that relationship is something that brings the potential for flourishing in a relationship, flourishing of each individual and the couple together. It's something that brings hope. It's something that shapes the way you parent, the way that you use your finances, the way in which you work, you interact in your community, and the way in which you serve others. Those are all pretty big deals in one's life. And to be coming from a different perspective in those and trying to merge two lives into one, it's just going to bring mess. It's just going to bring mess. All right? 2 Corinthians 6:14 says this: "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness?" So are you calling all people that don't believe in Jesus wicked? That's not what I'm saying here. And I believe the Bible has more dimensions to it than just that. What I'm saying is, it says, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. And then it's drawing some opposites here, right? Some different perspectives. Righteousness and wickedness, I think we could agree, are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Light and dark, opposite ends of the spectrum, we can agree with that. So what this is saying is don't be yoked together with unbelievers, because if you come from opposite perspectives, worldviews, and motivations, how can that work together? Do you guys understand what being yoked together is? I know this is an old agricultural term, and I know these days we don't have oxen out mowing our yards or tilling our gardens, okay? But yoked together was literally this piece of equipment that would harness two or more animals together so that their work would be multiplied and they'd pull a plow or whatever together. It would link them together so that they couldn't come apart, and they would be doing work. They would be doing their purpose. Everything they did was together. So when it gives this imagery of not being yoked together with unbelievers, it basically says don't engage in your life purpose, your life work, and your life motivation with somebody that is not heading the same place as you, that does not have the same core beliefs, faith, and foundation as you. Because light and darkness are opposites. How can opposite things come together? Righteousness and wickedness, how can those come together? There's just something foundational about linking up with something that's opposite, that does not move in the same direction. We do not want to live our life in relationship with others as a tug of war, trying to gain ground our way, get that flag to come just to your side of center so that you can say you won and move on in your relationship. We want to be heading the same direction, yoked together, not able to be pulled apart, heading in the same life direction with the same foundations and motivation as our loved one has, as our partner has. Does that make sense? Okay. Like I said earlier, this isn't to throw non-Christians or people that don't believe Jesus or are still trying to figure this Jesus thing out under the bus. That's not what we're doing here. We're not saying that they're less worthy of love or relationship. We're just speaking at a foundational level to how we can flourish and reach the fullness of life in a dating, marriage, or other meaningful relationship. If Jesus is not the biggest priority in your life, you will place expectations on the other person, and that'll just tear things down. That won't help you to flourish. This is a big deal. And moving on from here, if Jesus isn't central to your dating relationship, there's not a lot of other mechanics or specifics that I can give you to help. And I think you'd agree with that. Like from stage at a church on a Sunday morning, a Christ-centered, Bible-following church, if Jesus isn't the center of your life, then there's nothing else that I can give you that's going to actually help move you towards success in a relationship. It's a huge deal. That's got to be at the core. Now, this will be a tension. Like if you try to prove me wrong, be like, oh, no, I get you, Pastor, you have to say that because it says that, that's what they teach in Sunday school or whatever, but you're going to prove me wrong and you're going to show me like I can have success dating somebody or engaging in marriage with somebody that doesn't believe the same as I do. There will be tensions that will arise time and time again that will have ramifications on how you parent, how you work, how you utilize your finances, how you engage with friends, family, how you resolve conflict even. All these things will just continue to come up. This is a really big deal. So it's my prayer that you would each take Jesus seriously in your own life so that as you engage in these relationships, he would be a big deal and he would be able to guide you and be present in those and see your relationships flourish. So the next question, the final one we're going to address is, I'll preface this with saying I did campus ministry for years before I came down here to start this church. So I worked with high school kids, college students, and the question that I always got was, hey, me and my girlfriend, how far can we go? How far can we go, and is it still cool? Like, how far? They're talking physically, right? Like, in their physical intimacy, their relationship. Like, how close to sex can we get, and it still be okay? Like, I get asked that question all the time. And I think it's worth talking about in the spectrum of dating. Here's what the answer is. How far can we go? You can go all the way. The Bible says that sex is glorious. It's a good thing. You can go all the way. It's not about how far you can go. It's about when. It's about when. Growing up, my parents knew that I didn't like surprises, and so they always hid my gifts in just crazy places. It almost became a game just to see if they could keep stuff hidden from me until it was my birthday or Christmas. I mean, stuff would get hidden in the barn, in the shop, in the attic, because they knew that I was stealthy like that. I'm pretty much a ninja. So they would hide these things, and every year, well, I don't know if I can say every year, but most years, I had to battle this tension of I hate surprises. I just want to know. And I'd go oh, mom and dad are at work. And I'm going to go check things out, see if I can find it. And without dragging the story out too long, it must be said that every year that I actually got a glimpse, that I was able to cheat or get a sneak peek on what my gift was, the actual day when I was birthday or Christmas or whatever it was kind of ruined. By taking a sneak peek, ruining the surprise, seeing the gift, whatever you want to call it, before I was intended to actually experience it, it just took away from the whole experience of that day that was supposed to be celebrated itself. It did. It watered it down. It left me feeling like I had to be fake and hollow and oh, yay, I had no clue, and inside I'm you idiot, you shouldn't have looked, you're lying, your parents are trying to do something nice for you and you're ruining the surprise. And it was all rooted out of selfishness and lack of patience and self-control and all these things that a society of instant gratification tells us are just nonsense. But it always, 100% of the time, would ruin what was supposed to be something cool, surprising, to be celebrated. It just did. And I think that when we go somewhere that we're not intended to go yet in a relationship, it ends up like that. It ends up like that. It ruins the fullness of what something can be when it's intended to be utilized and experienced. It ruins the fullness of what a Christmas morning can be or a birthday party or whatever it is, because you've taken that sneak peek enough to whet your appetite to get you to the actual day, and it takes away from it. The thing is, when you're at a place in your relationship with somebody else where you just want nothing more than to express yourself in the fullness of intimacy that's available, your emotions are welling up, you just want to be with somebody in a biblical sense, you just want to go there, and you hold off, it actually is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to prove yourself trustworthy, and that you are going to honor somebody in a situation, that you're going to honor God, you're going to honor somebody's family, their parents, maybe even what you said you were going to do in a relationship. It's an opportunity that you have. When you care about the future and you show self-control and you show restraint and you show that you are going to care for somebody beyond getting what you want to get in any given moment and waiting to open up that gift for when it's intended to be used, it brings a trustworthiness and a fullness to a relationship that can be squandered if we're not patient. Now, I'm not saying that if you wait and you abstain, that everything's going to be perfect, there's not going to be messiness, and then the relationships won't be tricky and the issues won't come up. But you're going to be able to work through it from a place of knowing that the other person is committed to Jesus and that you have that foundation and that you have that anchor point. And there's going to be a lot more in your relationship that you get to look forward to than just in this moment. What makes me feel good now? But there's a hope for a future. There's a hope for being cared for, being honored and respected that is to be carried delicately, that's to be cared for and protected. And when we just operate on our selfish desires and ambitions and trying to get the most out of something and giving the least, it leaves relationships hollow. It does. It leaves damage. It's like a fallout zone. It just leaves like destruction all around it. In the dating period, you get a trial run to prove yourself trustworthy, to prove that you are somebody that can protect and honor the other person and help lead them to Jesus. One trial run, a short time. And I know if you're engaged or if you've been dating a while, it seems like an eternity. But I will tell you this, at my honeymoon, I felt like my engagement was like a week. Yes, it was like, man, it's like putting bamboo shoots under my nails while I was waiting for my wedding. I was like, this is torture. I can't, how long is this going to take? My goodness, this is lasting forever. And our engagement was only 6 months, if that. Correct me if I'm wrong. Hey, I remember the anniversary. So I looked over at you and I got all distracted. Stop looking so cute down there in the front row. So you have a short period of time, and once you're married and you're in the fullness of what your relationship can be, all that time, you're going to look back and you're going to be grateful that you honored and respected and cared for the other person. You're not going to be like, man, that was forever. That was that was torture. It's done. You're moving on. You're married. You're in the fullness of your relationship. You're able to express yourself fully in the covenant of marriage relationship. And it's just really good. And there's a lot of things that happen in a relationship that require trust of one another. I know some of you in here have been married for quite some time, and there are plenty of things that come up that require just trust. And if you can't prove yourself trustworthy on the front end of marriage, that is going to linger in to your marriage relationship and into the rest of your lives together. And I'm just a big believer in laying a foundation that you can build upon, Love under construction, right? We're laying a foundation in this dating thing to build a life upon. And I want trust to be something that is a part of my foundation. I want respect and honor to be the framing that hold up my drywall and my siding. I want these things to be integral in the life and the family that I'm building. And you get this shot in dating to do that and to do that well. And my heart is not, again, to bring shame or condemnation, but to bring an invitation to establishing something that's going to last, that's going to be fruitful, that's going to flourish. It's just good news when we do things and conduct ourselves that way. Now, some of you may be sitting here saying, man, well, thanks for that. Already messed that up. That's going to be an awkward Starbucks conversation this week, right? But the good news is you don't have to stay there. Like one small decision, one small turn from what you're doing now to where Jesus wants to take you and your relationship can change these things, can change them. You can start now. You can draw a line in the sand, say, I'm going to prove myself trustworthy from this point forward. I'm going to prove that my heart is not one of selfishness, but of repentance. That I want to turn from my sinful and selfish ways and I want to follow Jesus and lead you there or walk with you, whoever your significant other is, in that direction. You can change this. The game is not lost. You are not disqualified from a full, loving, and fruitful relationship with Jesus. You just need a little redirection. I am so grateful that we do not serve a God who is a God of disqualification, but he is a God of redemption and reconciliation, and he desires to do that in your relationships. If this is something you've struggled with or you've crossed that line, like he desires to enter and help you turn from that and flourish and follow him from here on out. This isn't just about boundary lines, though. Like this can quickly become a nice little religious checklist of do's and don'ts, but here's where this becomes cool and good news. Entering into a situation or a scenario with your significant other is not about like, how far can we go and where's the boundary drawn in chalk, but it actually becomes like, how can I love, honor, and respect Jesus and you in this moment? And I promise you, you will never regret energy put in that direction. Selfishness brings regrets. But following Jesus and trying to honor him in your significant other, that doesn't bring regrets. That brings hope, trust, and protection into your relationship. Worship team, you guys can head up here. We'll unpack more about this topic of sex specifically in the coming weeks. But you need to know, like, the Bible's view on sex is that it's good, it's glorious, it's something that is to be experienced fully. It's just to be experienced in the right context, in covenantal relationship with Jesus at the center. And that's where the fullness of this stuff happens, okay? Song of Solomon says this: do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. That doesn't say do not arouse or awaken love until you so desire. It says until it desires, until you are in the right relationship and place in a covenantal marriage relationship to express that in a protected, honorable, and caring way. I would argue that in order to experience the fullness of relationship in your life, there has to be a centrality of Jesus in that relationship. That is what will keep you anchored, will keep you central, will keep you together, heading the same direction. No matter if your GPS in your car gets confused and recalibrated, which we all know Garmin gets confused sometimes, or your phone, or whatever it is, what other things that you may use to give bearing to your life, Jesus is the one thing that remains true throughout time. The Bible remains true throughout time. This is how we are supposed to gauge true north and calibrate our compasses in our relationships, is through Jesus. Now, in this series, we're talking about love under construction. This imagery of like reconstructing or constructing love to the way that it is intended to be. And I think we'd be passing up a really cool opportunity if we didn't look at Matthew 7 and see what it says in verses 24. So if you got an app or a Bible, pull that out. Matthew, it's about 2/3 of the way in. We're going to be in chapter 7, verse 24. If you don't have a Bible or the app, it'll be up on the screen. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who has built his house on a rock. The rain came, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. The rock that we are designed and created to build our relationships and our lives on, to be the foundation of our lives, that rock is Jesus Christ. The sand is the ways of this world, what society and culture tell us to do in our lives. And it's my prayer for you guys, as my church family, as our spiritual family here, that you would build your relationships, not just dating and romantic relationships, but all your relationships on the rock, because storms will come. Storms will come. Rain will come. Things are going to try to beat up your relationships and beat you down. But when we build our foundation on the rock, it will not fail. It will remain. And I want us to be a group of people that can stand here after trials and tribulations and things happen, and we can say, you know what? The storm came, and man, it battered my walls. Like I heard the rain, but it did not fail because of Jesus in my life and in my relationships. That's my hope and prayer for all of us here. Let us build on the rock, not on the sand, not on instant gratification and selfishness. Selfishness is that sand that just kind of withers away under pressure. And this life is going to bring pressure, I promise you. It's going to bring pressure. But the rock will withstand. Jesus will withstand that in your life and in your relationship. Amen? Let me pray for us. Father, I thank you that you desire to be central in our relationships and our lives. I thank you for the good news that you sent Jesus as a sacrifice to eradicate the condition of sin in our lives, that we could walk in the fullness of life and redemption and reconciliation with our Father. I thank you for that news and what it means, not just in our personal lives, but in how we relate with others. So God, I pray that even today as we leave here, there would just be a fresh hope in relationships for each of us here. That all the ways in which we've built up walls to protect ourselves, that we've become jaded because things of the world have beat us down, or we haven't seen a good, healthy, successful relationship, that we would look to your word and to godly examples of what it looks like to follow you. That you would redeem that part of our lives. And God, for those of us that are here and we feel that we've been imperfect in walking this out, would you help us to turn? Would you help us to turn from sin and to you? Would you help us to turn to fullness and hope and restoration and making choices that will show that we, because of your power and your strength, are trustworthy. So I thank you for this time. And I praise you in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen.